All right. I am so amazed that you are sitting in your place. I'm sitting in my place. We're actually not too far away. And yet we're able to reach an audience that is all over the world. So people could be watching right now that are all the way around the other side of the globe. Like there are people going to bed. We just woke up.
Yeah, we are
So
reaching millions of people right now across the globe listening.
here's what
Pretty
I
cool.
I find fascinating is that so the way that when I came in with you to do this, like you guys had been doing it a certain way, you and Thomas. Now we're doing it this way, and I think one of the great things is that we have not been concerned with who's listening or getting to that mass audience yet. But one of the things that this lives evergreen, and so it may not be right now that someone's listening that has a revelation or that connects with something that you or I say or something that is pops up in their mind because of something that we said. But it could be 10 years from now. It could be 100 years from now. But the chance is, or the chance, there's that chance, there's that opportunity because we did that. Like if we didn't do this, then there would be no opportunity. And I find so many times I will stop myself from doing something because I haven't thought through the next 100 steps, even though there's something on my heart that I'm like, oh, it's got to get out. It's got to get out. And I'm too concerned with the how and the, well, what's next versus like the what's now. And I find that brilliant about what we're doing is that we're just okay. We're doing this, and we're going to reach whoever we're going to reach. And even if it was just reaching the two of us, I know this has made a big impact on my own life. Just getting a chance to sit down with you every week and talking and connecting, it's been an amazing thing. So yeah,
I appreciate, I appreciate your perspective, and you've been helpful with that because I know I can get into, I was just joking, but also there's a little bit of something in that for me because in the last business I had, we were making video games, and so it was a lot of measurement around how many people were playing every single day. And in that business, we were measuring thing in the millions, right? Like we literally had someone play our game from every country around the planet. And so we were
wow,
quite, we were really big on, okay, how many hundreds of thousands of people have played it this week? And so yes, I'm used to those numbers, and then with ours, it's different. But you're right, it's a different intention, and that bigger picture is helpful. And also, kind of tying into the topic we wanted to talk about here today is someone also said like do this for your grandkids. Like
mm,
even if you're right, and even if no one else listens right now, um, imagine the value that we could provide to our grandkids because I only have one recording of my grandfather and nothing of my great grandfather, but one interview that someone did with my grandfather. It's in Japanese. This is my dad's side, but the value I've gotten from that and the amount of times I've gone back and looked at that story, and I mean it's not even that long, but like even just in that and hearing his voice and listening to listening to it, but then reading the translation, super valuable. So yes, we're putting
yeah.
a lot more content out there than that, whatever it was, 45-minute interview of him. And yeah, who knows? Maybe it provides significant value for other generations.
Yeah, my uncle Rene and my dad years ago had the great insight to take some of the things that my grandfather did. So they're my dad's dad, who is somebody that I mean, he passed away 22 years ago now, 24 years ago, something like that. And he was somebody in our life that was always like he was a big presence in our life. He was a big presence in the community that he was in. He was like a leader in the community, and he owned an insurance company, and he did all kinds of stuff, and also sang in the choir at the church, like the big cathedral in Winnipeg. And one of the things that I always remember growing up doing is going to see him at midnight mass on Christmas Eve. And whenever we would get together, he was singing, and my grandmother was playing the not the piano, but I guess the piano and the organ. And I always remember that of him, and because he was somebody he didn't say a whole lot, he always kind of spoke in one liners. He was always kind of joking around and stuff, and he just was just this amazing guy. But my dad and my uncle decided that they were going to make a record, make a recording, make a CD at the time,
Hmm.
of him singing all the Christmas carols, all the Christmas songs, like the old Christmas songs that they would do. So they put out an album of all of the Christmas songs. It was just him singing and my grandmother playing the organ, and then my uncle put some other music on it too. But then they recorded another album, him just doing just traditional French folk songs, and that was 20, probably almost 30 years ago now when they did that. And it's something that still every year at Christmas when I listen to that album, we put it on all the time. My kids now know it. It brings, like, it chokes me up, and I get, I just think about my grandfather because of that recording. And I think, man, like, if they hadn't done that, if they hadn't captured that, like, that would just be something that would live in my brain. But as time goes on, I would for sure lose the connection a little bit because it just is this memory. But the fact that we have that music is, I mean, it's priceless. And I think that the more of that we have for us and of our parents, the more that we can capture some of that, I think it's invaluable for generations to come.
Yeah,
So yeah.
totally agree.
So tell me. So you've done some work on some stuff with your ancestry over the last while, getting involved with the museum here, and I'm fascinated. And that's one of the things I messaged you about yesterday about talking today. But like, what are some things that you've learned along the way that we can all kind of learn along the way from learning from looking at the things in the past? Because I think so often right now we're in this mindset culture where it's always like you're moving ahead, we're looking to the future, we're living in the future, we're innovating, there's this idea of like you got to break free from the past, that your past does not equal your future. And so when that's the case, I think I at least for me, it's been that, well, I'll just forget, like the idea is like I just got to forget everything that happened before so that I can start fresh. And yet there are some things, even though that the past may not dictate the future, it definitely, I believe, can inform. And because of the things that have happened to us and the things that have happened to the people before us, that we now have opportunities and we now have mindsets and ways of looking at things and frameworks to look through things that we can really learn from some of that. And so I'm really curious because you've kind of dove deep into it, and especially that it's across different cultures, and there's lots of upheaval that happened in your history, just geopolitically and all that stuff, things that I had no idea about. And so I'm fascinated I just want to ask you, like, what are some of the things that, well, maybe give us a little rundown as to like some of the work that you're doing, and then we can get into some of the stuff that maybe you've discovered and some of the things that were maybe surprising or not surprising, or things that, like how things have shifted for you in your own mind and how you do things.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, yeah, I appreciate the topic and honored to share. And it started, well, I guess just context wise, like I have always been interested in my family heritage, my family history, trying to put together the family tree and I think there's, yeah, anyway, so that was years ago, but I never really did too much with it. Coming into this year, I've mentioned it before on our talks, is this book Essentialism. And there was a chapter in there where he talks about like what were your grandparents' names? Like what was your grandmother's maiden name? Or your great grandparents' first names? Like getting you to just think about your past. And I think the lens from that, I made some notes to myself, and it definitely spurred a lot of what's happened this year. Was what are some of the decisions that our ancestors made, like our predecessors made, that have impacted our lives today, like allowed, like I wouldn't be here right now, had my great grandparents not decided to come to Canada. Like that's a huge decision that they made. And then thinking about, wow, well, look, what did they endure? Like what was life like for them? And then how many, I mean, there's an infinite amount of things really that have had to have happened for this right now at this moment right now to be possible. But just if I just look at the big things, what are some of the big decisions and who were my grandparents and why did they make those decisions? So I think, and then so that exercise then got me thinking about, okay, my life and choices I want to make. Like what decisions do I want to make in my life to be able to impact my, grandchildren, great grandchildren. And so that was a really fascinating exercise to just think about. So it got me starting to really think about my past. And then, this year, just, ironically, as it unfolded, I ended up selling my half of my previous business, that video game business, to my partner. And then that opened the door to a lot of new opportunities. And one of the ones that opened up almost immediately was with the Japanese museum here in Burnaby, but it's a national museum and cultural center, and they have a project underway to digitize more of the history of Japanese Canadians. And it was just like really like because I've done large projects like this where I've helped big organizations bring some technology solution they want online successfully. And so I started talking to them and I was like, wow, this is incredible. This is allowing us to be able to put more of our history online so that people like myself and my, future generations could go online and learn more about their history. So I was just like, yeah, I'm in. Like I'm passionate about this. I've got the experience. And so I've been working with them now for several months. And even just the amount personally I've learned, and I'm just excited about how to bring more of this to people. But there is just, I think everyone who's come, pretty much everyone's come to a new country, except for, of course, the first people that were here. But here in Canada, there's a lot of people that have come here from somewhere else. And I just think there's so many incredible stories in those experiences, coming somewhere new, starting to figure out new life, meeting new people, starting, a business or working for someone and raising a family in an environment like this. And so I think there's a specialness to anyone's story who's come here that can be really significant for current generations to know about. Because in my own exploration of my family's history, there's stuff that, I don't resonate with that actually still impacts me to today. And there's stuff that I do, like, anyways, we can go into that. But I just think, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And yeah, I just think I do think it's, there's obviously lots of work around being in the now, being present, being in the moment. And I think obviously that's super important work. You don't want to live in the past and you don't want to live in the future. I mean, you're never going to be grounded and happy. At the same time, I just think that there's some, big forces. And if you're not aware of them, they're in these invisible forces that could be running us without us even knowing and affecting how we show up in the present. So I do think it's really important to understand some of these so that we can show up as the best, version of ourselves that we want to be in this moment.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that you feel like that you can see now that, let's say, maybe you're doing some more research, maybe you're looking at it more closely, like some things that your grandparents, your great grandparents, like what can you see that they did that still has an effect on your life today?
Yeah. So the two big ones, again, one that I see as more positive and one that I see as, not so positive. But the big one positively is the amount that they persevered. There's even a word in Japanese called gaman, Gaman. Just it's like this extreme perseverance. Like in that side of my family, they came to Canada in the early 1900s, with barely anything, right? With barely knowing anybody and had to figure out life. They ended up, becoming quite industrious and setting up, they had land, they had, these sort of grocery stores, they had a part ownership in a lumber mill. My grandfather was selling insurance. They built this housing unit that were used for Japanese workers in sawmills that's still there today. Anyways, they set up life, and then World War II happened, and this is something that hasn't gotten all that much education in Canada, but it is a lot more now. During World War II, the Japanese that were living here, there's about 20,000 of them that had come to Canada that had been here for, some of them 40 years. My grandfather was born here. He was, Canadian, born in Canada, but anyone who had Japanese ancestry was moved away from their home if they lived near the coast. So if you were in Vancouver and they were put in camps, whether they had to build the camps themselves or put it forced into camps that they had to make work that the government provided for them. And then all of their businesses, all of their, there's huge fishing fleets, these sawmills, everything was sold. So so it was called internment. So they were, or incarceration. They were interned. Everything they had that they built up here as citizens of Canada was sold, put in the camps for several years, and then even after the war ended, they still weren't allowed to return back to their home city. They didn't have homes anymore. They were forced to stay, either move back to Japan or move out of BC. This was, racially driven. This had nothing to do with the war. And so for another 4 years after that, they still weren't allowed to return to the city that they knew. And so finally, in 1949, they're allowed to return. And in my grandfather's story, I just this perseverance, going through all of that to build a life, move away, and they had to now build life again. They were in these really small remote towns with not much. They had to figure out their own schools for their kids, their own food, their own work. They weren't allowed to work, in the other part of society. They had to figure out their own work largely. And then they had to relocate again. And after the world was over, so there's three times where they had to restart life and then come all the way back and do it all over again. And in my grandfather's interview, he talks about going into City Hall and being the first guy in line to be like, I'd like a business license. And there was a short exchange in the interview, and the woman's like, are you Japanese Canadian? He's like, yeah. You sure you want to do this? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, okay, good luck. Like he was like, what else am I going to do? Like this, I'm going to do this. I need to raise, I need to support my family. And so again, he finds a plot of land, a store that with a residential in the background, so that back end, so that he can run a business, family can live there. But just this, and then yeah, the family grew on, successful again. Like just this story of humility and perseverance, and nowhere through that in his wording or his interview was there any like victim or anger or like any of this. It was just like, this is what, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and then we're gonna figure this out, we're gonna persevere. So there's that part. That part is really inspiring for me, and I just find it extra special when you find these stories in your own family, like you were sharing about your grandfather there as well. Is like, it's different for me. It's harder for me if it's someone, several families removed from me, right? Or someone else even in another country, or some other hero. But
Mhm.
it's I don't know. I don't know what it is psychologically or whatever, but when it's in your own family, at least for me, it just feels even extra special. I'm like, wow, that's what like my grandfather did, or my great grandfather, or my dad, or my mom, or my great grandmother, or whoever it was. But like, I'm related to them. If they can do that, then what can I do? So there's that big piece that again I find super helpful to know. The other piece that I'm still working through is this piece around after the war. The whole mindset was, okay, it wasn't cool for us to be Japanese. People were, they were called enemy aliens, and they were moved away and everything taken away from them because of just who they were. Then there was nothing that they did wrong. There was never ever one person in Canada of Japanese descent that ever did anything during the war that would have validated this. But because of who they were, all this happened to them. So the mindset after World War II was, okay, let's just fit in then. Let's just be
Mm.
Canadian. So the community got very split apart, and the generation after that, like my father's generation, there's this documentary called One Big Hapa Family. So I'm what's called Hapa. I'm mixed. I'm half Japanese and half Caucasian. My mother's side comes from Europe. Um, yeah, I had my grandfather Jack on my mom's side fighting in the war for Canada, and my dad's side being interned. But there was this mindset of just fitting in, and so the lot of the Japanese men or women married some other culture other than Japanese, and so the Japanese in Canada are the most mixed. Like 80% of Japanese Canadians are now mixed, sort of racial
Wow.
origin. So I'm a byproduct of that mindset of just fitting in. And so that's something that's also come up this year a lot for me, is like, oh wow, I've had that sort of passed down onto me of just like fit in. And I know that's been in my family, just fitting. If you go back further to Japan, there's this quote of "Don't be the nail that sticks up." I think we talked about this last time. So, anyways, there's this whole mindset that's being passed on to me of just fit in. And so there's that part that I don't resonate with, that I'm still working through. Without knowing that in terms of where that could come from, I could just be running this program, right? I could just be running this pattern. And for me, I don't like that. I like to know, I want to know more about, why I am the way I am. And is that really who I want to be and who I think I am deep down inside? Or is this some program that's been passed on from my family or from culture or from society? So yeah, those are the two big things.
Yeah, it's interesting because some of those patterns, like really, I mean, that's what we do as humans. Like we recognize and perpetuate patterns, and some of them are great, and some of them are not so great, and some of them are, let's say, like a less insidious one, something that I grew up doing for the longest time, like up into even into my 30s, something that I got from my grandfather. And when I grew up learning this, I had no idea that it was something that was not like everybody else did. So my grandfather, like I mentioned earlier, like he only ever spoke in like these are like one-liners. He'd always have like these little zingers, these little jokes, and he just had that was kind of like how he talked. And it wasn't until he passed that my dad and my uncles, they were all talking, and they were like, oh yeah, like they realized that this about their own dad. They never really thought about it. And one of the things that he would love to do, so he was French Canadian, and so English was as a second language. He would always take things in French and translate it literally, like word for word, verbatim to English. So when you translate things, often when you translate things from one language to another, if you're just doing it word by word, when you it doesn't land as a translation. It doesn't make any sense. And but he would do that. And so I grew up learning these little things about how how he spoke, and I would repeat these things thinking, well, that's just how people speak. Like that's just what you say. That's the saying, or that's the phrase. And it wasn't until I mean, I remember growing up having people, I'd say things and people kind of look at me a little weird, and I thought, I didn't really think much of it, or I thought, oh, maybe it was something on my shirt, or I didn't think anything of it until it was like in my 30s. My now wife, Sarah, she had said, "Why do you say that?" It was something as like, what did I say? Oh yeah, close the light. So in French, ferme la lumière.
Mm.
The literal ferme is close. So I would say
Close, right?
close the light. I've gone my entire life saying, "Hey, can you just go close the light?" Like shut off the light, turn off the light. And it wasn't until she said that I said, "What is that what you say?" And then so I looked it up. I'm like, "Oh my gosh! Like I've been saying this wrong my entire life." Because and that was probably the least kind of that was probably the most benign one. But there was some that I find out are like very odd. I'm like, oh my god, how did I get through? Like, why? How did people not say like, what are you talking about? So many times, and that's just something that he did, and that's something that then my dad did, and that's something that I saw. So it's like there was this familial thing that was just passed down that I'd never questioned because I just never had to. It was just that was my environment, and that was just what I started to pass on. And it wasn't until somebody pointed out the mistake in it that it didn't translate that I'm like, oh, so I had to look at that. And how many times there's those things in our life that we just like, well, that's just the way that I grew up, and so that's just the way that I'm continuing on. And I think about even things like for us, like when we talk about finances, when we talk about, because we live here in Vancouver, and there's definitely a vibe around here for some people when it comes to, say, Vancouver is like a very expensive place to live. It's one of the most expensive places in the world to live, and we are blessed with the means to be able to do so, and we definitely feel the challenges that sometimes we don't, but that is something that is a reality for us, and it's a reality, and also like a much more pressing reality for a lot of people. And so if that's the way we're talking, like that things are always so expensive and we can't afford this and da da da. Like when we say that to things like to our kids, That's what they're hearing. And so they don't know any different. And so those are things that, when we think about, never mind the words, but the mindsets and the way that we think about things, those get passed down to our kids, whether we think they do or not. Like, because that's just the way, we act the way that we think. And they don't know any different. So that's what they're going to learn. And it may not be until they're adults where they examine, like, oh, wait a second. Like, my dad, my mom, they had these big limitations. They had these big limiting beliefs about these things or they had these things that they just spouted out, that they learned, that has no basis in reality, but that was just their reality. And it makes me acutely aware, like when I hear things from you about this, like, wow, like there's some things that, yeah, like you may not realize that you were taught and you were educated and you were just raised to just fit in. That was the whole ethos of everything. And even though it may not have been a conscious decision of your like of your grandparents or of your parents, like that was kind of ever present. And like, how do you feel that that's showed up in your life?
Well, yeah, being able to look back, it's I can this has been a lot of the work this year. Is there's a part of me that, okay, yeah, it just wants to fit in and not be the nail that sticks up, and then there's a part of me that wants to be the nail that sticks up, that wants to get more things out there, that wants to be not controversial for the sake of being controversial, but call some stuff out that I don't agree with, and raise awareness about things that I don't think are right. There's this justice part of me that perhaps also comes from a lot of this in the past too. So, it plays out with just this internal struggle of, well, what do I really want? What's the real me? And I don't want to, yeah, I don't want to be the person that sticks out. Like, I'm not going to go and wear like bright pink shirts and go, and try and get everyone's attention because I need to stand out. But there's a part of me that just wants to, I don't know, to really own who I am, own my heritage, be proud of that, and be able to share that and be okay with it myself, and not need any sort of external validation for that. And so I think there's still work for me at 46 in that, and have that play out.
And do you see, now that you've looked at it, have you seen things from your past, let's say from your childhood, from even your early adulthood, even as a parent, that you're like, oh, wait a second, like, oh, I can see that, like that pattern that began, that pattern that kind of emerged from the things that you're now learning. Like, can you see things that you grew up with?
For sure, right? And I did, I didn't necessarily know where it came from, but I did sort of wake up to this, I don't know, 10, 15 years, maybe 10 years ago. Like the mindset, my father was big on, after, he's big on go to university, get a good degree, get a job. Like, there was no suggestion of maybe you could start your own business. No, it was the just go and do the safe thing, fit in, get married, have kids. Like, that was what was sort of I don't know, the story of how my life should unfold, externally. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what I should do. So yeah, I went to university, got a good degree, got a job with an engineering company right afterwards. And then it started to dawn on, and then I got this great opportunity to move overseas. And then things really started to open up for me. Like, wait, there's a whole other world out here. Like, that's not what I'm supposed to just do. It was like, it's kind of like any of these stories of the hero's journey, right? The Lego movie is the classic guy who's just like, hey, buddy, like he's just living out the program of, I'm going to go get my coffee, I'm going to go to my job, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is my life, and I'm just going to be nice, but sometimes we get knocked off that path and go, wait, there's so much more out there possibly for us. So, that was actually that part of the journey was 20 years ago. But that if I hadn't have woken up to that story, that might still be a program running, like, and that would be something I'd pass on my kids, right? But meanwhile, my dad started his own business, several of them, and even ended up getting, he started an accounting business with his partners and friends, ended up selling that to a big firm, then exited again, went back on his own, then sold again. Like he has his own journey of, and so everyone in my family had in terms of being, industrious and entrepreneurial and figuring things out for myself. And yet the mandate passed on to me was, never even mention of any of that. It was just get a job, fit in. So yeah, that's certainly some rewiring that I've done to, retell my own story and to show my kids that like anything's possible. Like I'm not gonna presuppose that you have to do things a certain way because that's how things were done in the past. I want to make sure that they have the awareness and the empowerment and the openness to be able to explore whatever path they feel is right for themselves.
I watched this great video a few days ago. It was an interview with Alain Cardone. So she's the wife of Grant Cardone. So both of them, who co-own, I guess, run Cardone Capital. Who he wrote a book, 10x. 10x.
Yeah.
Like, I guess he's known for this 10x brand.
10X guy, yeah.
Yeah, and they have two daughters. Now they're getting into their teens, I believe. And she was talking about how one of her daughters, her youngest daughter, came to her and said, "Hey, like can I get the new iPhone, whatever it was, like the brand new one?" And her immediate response was, "Absolutely, yeah. You want to get the new iPhone? Absolutely." And she said so many people would think about that, like for a young kid, like, "Oh, I want this," like, "Oh no, well that's too expensive," or "Why do you need that?" But her response was, "Oh yes, absolutely," because she said, "There's no lack here. We don't live in a space of lack." And granted, they are uber wealthy. But then what she followed up was what I thought was so brilliant. She said, "Absolutely. There's no lack here. All right, so you want this iPhone. Great. What are you going to do to get it? What kind of value are you going to bring in $500,000 worth of value to Cardone Capital? Are you going to do this work? Are you going to contribute that? Are you going to go volunteer?" So there was the thing that you want attached to creating value in the world, creating value in the business, doing some sort of something to contribute. And I saw them, like, oh, that is amazing. Because it's not like, okay, you want something, so you live in a wealthy family, so we are going to just give it to you.
Right.
It's teaching them, yeah, you can have anything you want if you're willing to contribute to others to have it. So it was like the undertone of all of that was you can have anything you want by helping others get what they want. Like that's what I took from it. And I thought, oh, that is an amazing thing. Like how many times have I even, like I thought about, like my kids will go out and like, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this. And we make up whatever it is that we say to them. But like I think, oh, what am I teaching my kids by how I'm answering their questions? Like how, like what is happening? Like what is coming from my past or my own limitations that maybe I picked up from myself? And think about some of the generational things that are being passed down. Like sometimes I believe, and I'm learning this just now, is that those generational things could start with me. And that I could be the start of a generational, like a lineage of framework, a lineage of thought process, a lineage of mindset, good or bad. But it's not just that the past will inform now, but now I get to inform the future. And I get to make something different, potentially, if I want. Something that never existed in my past. Something that never existed in my, in my realm. That I get to then create and pass forward. And, think about just like what we talked about right from the beginning, like how amazing that just us being here right now, just speaking to each other, can have a big effect on even one person, that can create a change in their lineage because of something that they learned. And just watching that video from Eleanor Cardone, like she was just asked a question. She may not even remember what she said. She may not remember that moment ever again. She may not look back on that, but that affected me. Like that was like big. I'm like, wow, like that was huge. That could be something that is just transformational. And I think we owe it to ourselves, but also to our kids to really look at like what am I saying? What am I doing? Like what is the example that I'm being for them right now?
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge, man. Thinking about this topic as you brought it up is and looking back at my notes from the work earlier this year, I didn't see for my life that I was going, I don't see this big thing like I'm moving my family to a new country and we're gonna, pioneer and start life and have to build our own house and figure out, I didn't see that in my story, like my ancestors on my dad's side. I mean, those decisions were profound in terms of me being here in Canada now. But so I don't see, when I think about the decisions that we get to make in this life to impact our future generations, I don't see it as like I love Vancouver. I don't see myself, moving us to go halfway around the world. But I thought about, wow, one of the biggest things that I would like to leave for future generations is exactly what you're talking about, is terms of like how I'm showing up, how we're on, the kind of stuff I want to put out in the world, the way I'm raising my kids, the way I am with them, the way that, who I am ripples out into the community in terms of their friends and our friends. And to me, that's the biggest thing that I can leave is who I am. And as you're saying there, who I'm being and how I show up. Because that, in terms of character, in terms of values, in terms of, impact that it's going to have and rippling out. I think for me, that's one of the, again, for me, that's the biggest thing I feel like I can leave is just who I am and
Mm-hmm.
those values and the work that, I know you're doing and that we're doing to be the best father, the best husband, the best man, the best person that we can be. To me, that's the work. That's the most valuable thing that I can pass on.
Yeah. Is there something that you learned since you, let's say, since you started doing this work more deeply? Is there something that you consciously learned that you're like, oh, I'm going to stop this. Like I don't want this to continue. Like, oh, I can see this and this is done. Is there anything like that that you saw?
A good question. Um, the one that just pops into my mind, I'm sure there's a lot. The first one that pops up in my mind is being like emotional, like self-regulation. Like early on as a father, I would get triggered and upset much quicker and not know how to deal with that. And you know, yeah, I can remember it's like early on we would do timeouts. And I can remember though that it was more for me than it would even be for the kid because I
Right.
needed the space to calm down and get myself centered. And not, I didn't have the tools or even the self awareness to be like, man, why am I so upset right now? Where is this coming from? Why am I taking out on my kid? So I think that to me is the number one thing that I've worked on, and I even apologized to my son. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. When you were younger, I used to get way more upset and upset about stupid things like you wanted to wear this to school and I didn't want you to, and that would lead to a big upset. And he was like 4 years old or something like that. And he's like, and so I apologized to him. I'm like, I'm sorry that I was like that. I'm not anymore. And he's like, I don't remember it, Dad, but I appreciate the apology. But but maybe some deep, somewhere deep down he does, right? And so, I think it was important for me to give him that apology. But yeah, that to me has been, because growing up, that wasn't a big thing. I think for my parents' generation is emotional awareness and being able to self-regulate and be able to healthily express different emotions. And I just don't think that was a big part of their upbringing. But for me,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the first things that it pops into my head is being able to self-regulate much better, to be far more aware of my emotions, where they're coming from, realize that triggers are, what was someone saying the other day? Like that's a part of our sensory nervous system. Like that trigger is, if we're getting emotional about something and we're triggered, that's a good thing. It's not, but if we take it as a signal about, well, why is this such a big thing for me? Do I want this to be a big thing for me? Where is this coming from? So that whole emotional exploration, that's the biggest thing, and being able to pass that on and to help my kids be far more self-aware, far more able to motion regulate their own emotions, yeah, that's probably one of the ones that pops up.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. It highlights for me that when we think about, like, we are all stories in motion. Like, we're all stories that are being told, like, we're that are unfolding, and that we are so informed by the stories that we've been told. We're informed by stories that we tell ourselves, and we get to choose those stories. Like, the stories that we tell ourselves are not necessarily true or false. Like, say, like, what you told your son. It's like, he may, like you said, I don't remember, but thanks. And we might think that something in our own mind, like, oh my gosh, like, I totally scarred him, or like, this happened, and so this is how it's affecting them, and
Right.
they may have no clue. They may not have registered for them at all, but for us, it's like the most important thing. It's like, oh my gosh. And so we can think that, like, we are, that we are at cause for all of this amazing, like, all this amazing life, or all this disaster in everybody else's life, when really, like, we might play a bigger or a smaller role than we may think. And that's all because of the stories that we tell ourselves, and they are just as true as we believe them to be. And so I think, well, if this story is not necessarily true, then there may be another story that is more true or less true. And but we get to choose the story that we tell. And I think of, like, if I'm telling a story about my own life, about myself, about what's happening, I should ask myself, like, well, is that working out for me? Is this getting me what I want? Is the story that I'm holding on to getting me the thing that I want? And if it is, then great, keep telling it. But if it isn't, like you're saying, then it's like, okay, well, then let's take a step back and let's reflect on, okay, well, what is actually going on here? Like, what is true here? What am I making up? What am I bringing in from the past? What am I projecting into the future that is not necessarily, true? And I think that's so cool that at any moment when we become aware, that we get to then choose. We get to choose to
Mm.
do something different, or to be somebody different. And we're not bound by anything. Like, I don't have to be the same person I was 5 minutes ago. There's nothing saying that I have to do that. There's nothing saying that just because of something that happened to my great grandfather, that needs to happen to me. Like, there's no rule about that. The only rule is the rule that I make up in my own head.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that as a very empowering place to come from, to live, because yeah, I know we've said it before. We're, as humans, we're meaning making machines. Those stories, we can decide how important we want to make them, and how big a part of our lives we want to make them. And I feel like this process of being able to go into our own past, and our own childhood, helps us figure out, like, what am I giving meaning to? Like, what am I making important? Even the phrases like you were sharing, that I say, like, is that the way I want to say it? Why am I saying it like that? Like, why is this so important to me? Is that truly what I believe, or is that something that got passed down to me because that's the way my ancestors did it? But I don't believe that anymore. I remember that being some big work early on, especially in the men's group. When we started doing this work now, yeah, 10 years ago, just in men's groups, is like, oh, where did I get this belief around what it means to be a man? Is that something I saw in media? Is that the influences I had as a kid? Was that from my dad? Was that, like, but is that really what I believe? And so from this point forward, what do I want to give meaning to? Like, what, as you're saying, story do I want to tell here? But yeah, that's a huge piece of self-awareness, is to figure out, like, and to have the, like, empowerment to realize, like, I don't have to keep telling the story the way it's always been told. I get to tell it differently. And it's it can take some work to dig into changing that story, because it might have been there for a long time. Like, I was even recently digging into epigenetics, how stuff from our ancestors, trauma that our previous generations have experienced, even if we weren't alive yet, can get passed down to us through gene expression, through epigenetics. I'm like, holy cow, like this, I could be running a pattern and be totally oblivious to it, and not even know that it, didn't even happen to me in my life, but have it, have happened in my parents' life, and it got passed on to me. But it can be different. It just takes some awareness, and it does take some work.
I think about something as you're saying that sometimes, so we have the opportunity, as we're telling the stories of our past or telling the stories of our ancestors and of ourselves, that we can get stuck in just being so myopic about my own lived experience or your own lived experience, that that's really kind of all there is. But really there's so much, I think there's a lot of strength to be gained by, say, like the family story and the truth of like all of the people that came before me and all of the people that came before you, like what they've done and how they've gotten to where we are today. And that there's a real, the cohesion of that is really powerful. I had an experience, I think it was about a year ago. Yeah, maybe last fall or winter, when I went out for a walk with my daughters. So they would have been then 3 and 7. They're now 4 and 8. And we went out to the woods in here in North Vancouver, and we just went for a little walk, and it was pouring rain outside. And as we were walking, like as we were driving up to the trailhead, the kids were complaining like, I don't want to go out in the rain, and it was like it's cold out. And I'm like, okay, once I know it's raining now, but once we get under the canopy of the trees, it's not going to be as bad. Like it's gonna be wet, but it's not going to be like pouring down on us. And so we get onto the trail, and we start walking, and the kids are like, oh, it's wet and there's puddles everywhere. And I'm like, well, you guys have rain boots. You can jump around in puddles. Like they love watching Peppa Pig. So there's like jump around in muddy puddles. And I remember at some point, I don't know where this came from, but I just remember stopping. Like they were both complaining and they're both kind of whining. And I was like, I was really sick of it. And I just remember turning to them and I said, it's okay that it's raining. Desaulniers, like my family name, Desaulniers aren't afraid of the rain. And they both of them kind of stopped. I'm like, yeah, we're not afraid of the rain. Us Desaulniers, we like the rain. And for whatever reason, like they kind of just both like took it. And like, okay, great. And from then on, we had a lot of fun. And every time then, since it's rained, well, I'll be like, if it's like, oh, we won't go to the park. It's raining right now. And it actually happened last night. They went out on their bikes. It was raining here in West Van, and they wanted to go out on their bikes and their scooters. And I said, oh, well, it's raining right now. Like, yes, well, I'm going on, like, maybe we'll wait till it stops raining. And my older daughter says, it's okay. Desaulniers aren't afraid of the rain. And I was like, whoa, that was really cool. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's go. And it's like we instill this thing, like we're not. It's not just me. It's like we're a family unit. Our family unit stands for something, and I think there's a lot of power that can come from like taking strength from the family unit, as opposed to just like, man, like I don't think I can do this, or man, like I don't have it within me. But then we think about, okay, well, I'm bigger within my family. And even more so, if I bring in my dad and my mom and bring in my grandparents, there's much more people that I can bring in with me to teach me some of the lessons and to take strength from the fact that they were resilient. The fact that, like, say, like your grandfather, like he was the first one. You can take strength from that. And even though there's a lot of stuff that you don't want to bring, but you take some of the things that you do want to bring, and you make it bigger than just myself. Like this is the coat of, the coat of armor that I wear. This is the emblem that I wear, my family crest that I bring with me. And there's all of the strength and all of the amazing things that I bring with me into this moment. And I think we have that power, and that power to be able to then create that within our own family. That, Desaulniers aren't afraid of the rain. Like this, which for me, the bigger sense and what I'm hoping will come out of it for my daughters is like, we're not bothered by little things, that we just persevere, that we find a way, that we have fun in the challenge, that what stops other people doesn't stop us, that we just keep going. And I saw it in my daughter last night, and I was like, that's amazing. I love that.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, like these seeds that we consciously get to plant, and we get to watch them grow as you're sharing there. And it's with great power comes great responsibility. It's just making sure we're you know, as self-aware as we can be, so that we're planting conscious seeds, the seeds that we want to see grow. And yeah, I think that's an awesome example.
Yeah.
I also wanted to
So
mention
what?
that
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
yeah. Well, you brought up that excerpt from that book earlier about how important it is for, any generation to hang around with people that aren't in their generation, like to get more of these ages to mix, like that today we live in this, segregated society by age, where, a lot of times, yeah, kids only hang out with kids, their age, and adults hang out with people their age at work, and we put older people in homes that we never see. I just, I was thinking about that a bit more too, and just how important it is to get, for anyone to get different perspectives, and how important, especially when you're young, right? You can get locked into like, oh, this is what the world is like if you just hang out with people like you and people that think like you and you're in your little bubble. But how important it is when you talk to people that are much older, they've lived through, so much, and they have potentially such a big experience and a much broader perspective on things. I think they can really help. I know it's been helpful for me, for someone to be like, just to give me a whole other perspective and be like, oh, maybe this isn't such a big deal. Maybe I'm too locked into this, this narrow thing. Maybe there is a much bigger picture I can see here. Anyways, I just thought you brought that up, and I thought it was relevant and a really good point.
Yeah, that came from The Daily Dad by Ryan Holiday. So it's a great book that for any dads listening, I would highly recommend. It's like a bite size, like a 1 page little excerpt every day about just a lesson and a story about just being a dad and what it means, and also tied into Stoicism, which is something Ryan Holiday writes extensively about. And what he's best known for is all his books on Stoicism, and yeah, and I think even broader than that, never mind the ages, but I think the more broadly that we expose our children to different ideas, to different ages, to different cultures, to different foods, to different religions, to different things that are different from them, we start to think, or for me, I believe that we start to see that even though the lived experience that so many people have, there's something inside there that connects all of us, that your grandparents went through a time when they chose to just be very resilient, and in that, like, you can just imagine the challenges that they felt. And like, I don't imagine that your grandfather just every day just woke up and was like, all right, let's get to work, and there was never any doubt of like, oh my god, what am I doing? Like, this is so hard. But yet through that, he persevered. And you can imagine, like, I think, like, man, like, yeah, like, if they have those feelings, they think like that, but there's also this common humanity that bonds us all, that we all want to be loved, we all want to love, we all want to contribute, we all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, we want to be part of a family. And the more that we expose each other and ourselves and our kids to just life, just a broad experience of life, that the more it's just good for them. It's just good for us, and I believe only good things can come of it.
Well, just yeah, I want to reflect back to you that there's a different way that could go though. You have a beautiful perspective when considering that, when thinking about exposing your kids to all these different things, different food, different people, different cultures, different um, your mindset is to help them see the commonality that we all share, and how beautiful that is. There is a whole other way that could go. You could a different, different parent or a different, different situation. The kids could start looking at, oh, look at how different we are. Look at how
Mm.
unique I am. Look at how, oh, my way is comfortable and safe and better. All these other ways are different and scary and uncomfortable and not, and get classed up. Sometimes we can get into that trap of, oh, it's uncomfortable and different, therefore it's bad. So that's a whole other mindset though. But I really wanted to appreciate your mindset that you're coming from, is like, no, let's find the good, let's find the common, let's find, what binds us all together, even though we have these differences. So I think that's awesome. That's a wonderful place to be coming from.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like it's not the event, it's the perspective taken through the event. It's the framework,
Hmm.
the mental framework that we're taking into the thing. So it's like you talk about like we're meaning making machines. So it's like what do we make this mean? So like I get to choose, or not that I get to dictate the meaning for my kids, but I get to expose them to a meaning that, unless it was way out of left field, like they will likely adopt. Like it's like people who grow up learning to be racist or learning to hate others, like this otherism that goes on. It's like that is not a, it's not something that they're born with. That's something that they were taught. Like that's something that they learn, and it's also something that they can that we can unlearn. But yeah, it's like it's not just that's a great point. It's not just exposing them to the world, it's exposing them to the world and giving them context for that. It's like giving them some sort of meaning or offering them some sort of meaning to the experience and to the thing that they're being exposed to, as opposed to just, yeah. So I think just giving context and giving some sort of integrative framework for our kids is also key. It's not just like, hey, shove them out in the world.
Yeah.
It's to show them and offer them, a perspective of compassion and love and understanding and oneness and unity and love.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and to be able to offer that to them, I mean, that's the work, right? Like that's the work that you've done. That's the work we're doing, to be able to offer them that perspective versus, no, this is the way we thought about those people that, my parents thought and their parents thought. So that's the way you're going to think about them. Um, yeah, because there's so many ways that can go, right? You could be like, oh, well, when you do this, when you travel and expose them to, like, oh, well, they've got it better than us. Like you can always do the grass is greener, or no, that's worse than. Like, you could just get into this better than or comparison. But yeah, I mean, by doing the work, hopefully that part that we can pass on is to plant those seeds and give them that perspective that hopefully empowers them to find, you know, sure differences, but also what's good in all of this and what does ultimately bind us all together. And I mean, through all of this, avoid these things that have happened in the past where we think that, oh, they're different from us. There's something, you know, just because they're different means that there's something wrong. Hopefully we don't repeat these mistakes from the past. I mean, that's ultimately the work of part of why we're putting this more of this history online in the Japanese Canadian story here is I think it's the second largest civil rights infraction that Canada's, you know, gone through. The first by far would be the First Nations people here. But that's a
Mm-hmm.
much bigger one that fortunately is slowly getting addressed. This one with the Japanese Canadians was the second one. So by putting more of this online, by making it available, first and foremost, the people that experience this and have now lived through it, that's helping the people in the community heal and learn and get to a more hopefully empowered place. And then even for the general public to come and realize that, oh wow, this Canada did this, like this happened. Okay, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? And the way you're sharing by helping our kids, you know, see the good in people that are different from them and cultures that are different and different ways of living is certainly a very certainly one way that we can change the future and live in the present and avoid what's happened in the past.
Yeah, man. Well said. Well, I appreciate you sharing your perspective and your story, and that's awesome. How can people get? I'm fascinated by this whole thing, all the stuff that you guys are doing. Like, how can people get more information on is the work that you're doing in the museum and or even the museum itself? Because I think for anybody, I think that's a fascinating, not just for the Japanese Canadians or the Japanese, but for just people, because I think there's stuff that we can learn from everyone.
Yeah, like there's fortunately there's been just even in the past several years several new resources coming online. I mean broadly, if you just search Japanese Canadian internment, you'll find a lot of these resources to start to go like, wow, this happened. This is what we did as Canada. Okay. And then specifically, the museum is the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center. That's my client that I'm working with. Our project, we're just at the beginning stages of it, so there's nothing online yet that people can use. But the goal will be that people can go to this one place and then be able to access all these different resources that live on different websites and different institutions. And there is a big site that recently came online called the Landscapes of Injustice. So what they've done is compile all of the, just how much stuff are we talking about that? Like we're talking fishing fleets. Like the Japanese were doing very well here. I mean, that was we can go into it. We're at the end of the time here, but it was actually because they were doing one version of the story is that they were very competitive. Like they were doing very well here in business and in commerce and lumber, groceries, fishing, land, farming. And so they were, perceived as a threat to sort of the incumbent. And so there was this
Mm.
opportunity when World War II came to be like, oh, well, how do we deal with the competition? Let's send them away and take all their stuff like that. Anyways, that is not the way I hope our generations going forward do things. But
Yeah, really.
unfortunately, yeah, that's. But anyways, the landscapes of injustice. I mean, website talks just shows documents. They've scanned thousands of documents of how much stuff was disposed of. So they can check that out too if you want to go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, really, man. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, dude. I appreciate
Yeah,
you.
appreciate you bringing this up.
Yeah, man. All right. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, bro. Yeah, thank you.